All right, welcome to my second video. I grabbed this old headset from downstairs, and hopefully the audio is a little better. I try. It's not a whole lot better, but I did realize the first video kind of sounded like I was in a cave. Um, so I'm probably gonna do maybe two videos today, and then I'll just upload them separately, so it's a little easier to use them as a specific. I can put a title on it, and then you know what the video is about, versus me just rambling for 30 minutes about four different things, and then you kind of have to sift through it to find what you're interested in. So for my first video today, I wanted to just kind of go about how I got started. And I mentioned I tried to pull up my book report last time, and this part wasn't able to be seen with the way it kind of cropped it out. So that is just showing that I have it set to most recent rates. I know nobody really was that suspicious, and then that's that. So to go back to here, um, I think a lot of people have a different way that they get started, obviously. And for me, I started by wanting to write a fantasy book. And it probably from the time I graduated college, like I did creative writing classes in college. And then I ended up double minoring in English and creative writing, and then I majored in psychology. And once I got out of college, I started teaching. But in the back of my mind, I always kind of thought that the thing I was going to do was going to be to write a book. And I think at the time, my idea of what it meant to write a book was to spend a year, maybe 2 years, working on some giant fantasy novel, and then get a deal with a traditional publisher, get maybe advanced like $40,000. And I don't think I even thought about what would happen past the advance if I'd get royalties. In my mind, it was just like, if I get $40,000, then I could quit teaching and I could focus on writing for an entire year on that money. I kind of had these big, lofty visions of what that would be like. And what ended up happening was that I taught at a high school for probably, I think it was 3.5 years. And the whole time I could kind of feel that future slipping away, year by year, as sometimes I'd get on a kick and I would write a little bit every day, maybe like 3 pages of my fantasy book. And then I would probably get maybe on average like 50 pages into it. And then I would go back to the beginning whenever maybe I got out of it for like a week. And I would reread the first couple pages. And especially even the first sentence, sometimes I'd get stuck there and I would just picture agent reading that first sentence, or I would picture a reader reading that first sentence and thinking everything hinged on that one sentence, and putting so much pressure on that sentence and that first page and the first paragraph to be the greatest thing ever written. And I kind of had this, it's like I built it up. When you work on something for that long, you turn it into bigger than it has to be. And I almost got it to the point where if I hadn't written the next Lord of the Rings, then I had failed. And when you have that kind of expectation for yourself, it's pretty natural to get to a point where nothing ever happens, because you can't live up to that, and you can't look at what you've written and tell yourself honestly that it's that good. And if you need it to be that good to feel like you've done it correctly, then you're never going to do it. You're just going to keep poking at it and realizing it's not good enough and repeating the cycle. So that's kind of where I was. And then we found out we were having my second daughter, and just financially, I was a teacher, my wife was a teacher, but she was going to have to quit that year to take care of our second daughter, because daycare was like $2,000 a year if we put both our kids in it. And that's about, $2,000 a month. That would have been nice. So we were making about $2,000 a month each after taxes. So it was kind of like, do we either, I'm sure everybody's been in that situation. So we decided she was going to stay home. But then it turned out that my health insurance rocketed up because of the second kid. And we were going to be paying $1,400 a month to cover the four of us. And I was making $2,000 a month. And so that was going to leave us with about $600 a month in like profit from my full-time teaching job. And it was over that summer going into that year where that was going to be the case that I started to really, I had to figure something out. And I got really lucky because my brother, and he actually does some videos too. It's Dark Star Press, and I don't think he writes under his pen, so I'm not going to say his pen name, but the YouTube channel is Dark Star Press, and he kind of does more like a vlog style of video, which I may get to at some point and kind of do that kind of thing too. But my brother had been writing this kind of stuff already for like a year, maybe even more than that at that time. And he was the one who kind of got into it on his own and figured it all out from like IRC forums and Something Awful or wherever it was that he got it. And I remember kind of looking at it as this weird thing that my brother did and never taking it too seriously. And but over that summer, he for probably the third time he tried to convince me that I should try it, and I just happened to be financially desperate at that point, and I finally listened to him. And it also happened that Kindle Unlimited 2 had died a couple months prior to that, so he had already transitioned into writing novels, and he was in a Slack with some other people who were doing the same stuff. And so he convinced me to start out, and I started out. I don't write on his pen name anymore, so I'll like admit it. I guess I wrote a sci-fi romance for my first couple books, and he gave me the advice though that I shouldn't. And I touched on this in the first video, but I should stop thinking of it the way I was thinking about my writing, and that was probably the fundamental thing he told me that really broke me out of this cycle. And the other, I guess I should explain what he said. He said to write 5,000 words a day, don't reread what I've written, don't go back and edit, don't let myself start at the beginning again, and just think of it as a get it out there kind of mentality. And then when I'm done with the whole thing, I could reread it, but to only give myself a day or two to do that. It's not going to be some magnum opus where I spend my whole life, tweaking and revising and trying to get every sentence perfect. And before I wrote it, his other advice was to read one or two books in the genre, just to give myself an idea of, if it's like a coloring book, like what are the lines? I'm the one doing the coloring, but if you're writing to market, it's kind of like being in a coloring book. You can color it with all your artistic ability and creativity, but you do have to be aware that there are lines within every genre and every market that you need to stay within, because it doesn't matter how pretty your colors are. If you just color over the whole page and ignore the lines, then it's not going to be a complete product, I guess. That's not a perfect analogy, but that's kind of what I was thinking. So anyway, I read two books, and then that helped me too, because they were books that were doing pretty well, and they didn't seem perfect by any means. There were errors, there were some just weak points, and I read that, and I kind of, I'll admit it now, I thought, man, I am such a great writer that I'll come into this and just dominate. If this is the quality of writing that's doing really well, I've got to be such a better writer than this. And so I thought I would come in and just kind of take the sci-fi romance world by storm. And that wasn't exactly how it happened. I think my first book got to rank 700 or so. And that was only really because I had a ton of help from people who knew what they were doing. I'm sure if I had launched my first book blind and just kind of on my own instincts, it would have been a lot worse. But it got to rank 700 or something, and then I think over 3 months or so, it ended up making like $5,000, which I was really happy with too at the time. And but to backtrack slightly, the only thing that really got me out of that mentality of perfectionism was, one, was my brother's advice, and then two was that I wasn't writing in my passion anymore. Fantasy is kind of what I read for fun, and sci-fi is what I read for fun. And when you're writing what you read for fun, I think you've had a whole lifetime of built up expectations for, if I did this, I would want it to look like this and this and this and this. And also you're probably putting your real name on it, so it feels personal and it feels like this is me, this is what I am, and I'm putting a piece of myself out there. And it's not to say you aren't doing that if you're writing anything, because it's pretty hard to write something without putting yourself into it. But just taking that step away from my passion to writing about something that wasn't really my passion, but let me use an angle of something I was passionate about, was a really important distinction for me, because it let me let go enough to actually finish a book, because I was okay with 95% good or 90% good. Whereas when I was writing fantasy, I needed 100%. Like, it had to feel perfect to me. But with a sci-fi romance, especially when I read what the competition was, it kind of just made me think, okay, I want this to be as good as I can make it. But the expectation from the market isn't that this is going to be perfect. I don't need a $3,000 editor, and I don't need to agonize over the plot, because what the readers are looking for here is something that entertains them, and these are kind of like consumable stories. They're not stories that are going to stay on somebody's shelf and they're going to have conversations at the book club about. It's part of it is being realistic about what you're writing and for whom, and that was kind of what changed it for me at the beginning. So I wrote those. I wrote one sci-fi book, and then I wrote a second sci-fi book that didn't do quite as well as the first, and then a third that did quite a bit worse than the first and the second, and then a fourth that did significantly worse than the first, second, and third. So I think the money wise, it was like book one was like 5,000, book two was like 2,500, book three was like 1,200, and then book four was like I like negative. Like I think I spent like $200 on it and somehow managed to lose money. And at that time, I was pretty much just paying for like a couple newsletters. Maybe about in the $200 range of paying for paid newsletters, and then I paid for my first cover, and then I started making my own after that. So I wasn't paying for covers, and then I also paid for. I think by like the third or fourth book, I started kind of messing around with Facebook ads. So I was doing like a total budget of, I don't know, even like 50 or $100 for a book. So it wasn't a crazy amount of spending. And so timeline wise though, that fourth sci-fi book was kind of right before my summer vacation ended as a teacher. So I used my summer to kind of just deep dive into all of this. I got into my brother's Slack, and I heavily leaned on everybody in there. And that's just a sidestep for a second. I feel like that's kind of one of the reasons that I always feel a little bit compelled to be helpful, is because I kind of got dragged like kicking and screaming into writing romance. And then once I was dragged into it, I got handed a group of people who knew what they were doing and were willing to help me. And so it's kind of like a pay it forward sort of feeling. Like I always want to feel like I don't forget that I wouldn't have been able to do it by myself, and then that I at least put some of the motivation out there, if not the direct blueprint to success, so that other people who maybe are kind of in that gray area can feel a little bit more motivated to jump in. Um, so back to the timeline part. My school year started, and I had the idea at the time, like mafia romance was kind of popular, and I had the idea to start a new pen name, which is kind of the one I've been writing ever since. And I jumped in there, and my first book did surprisingly well. It was, I think the profit on that one, and some of these numbers, it's a little skewed because there was a number at the time and then a number now as my books have kind of fed into my catalog. So kind of just ballparking, but I know I remember it was sort of a milestone because I had hit like $500 or $600 a day at that point with that one debut book. And I remember I was teaching, and I wrote that book at the beginning of the school year though. So I probably like the first 2 weeks of school, I had already started the book when the school year started, and then I was writing it like during the teacher planning week, and some of my downtime, and then I was working on it while the kids were, taking quizzes and stuff, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I did. And so that book started doing really well, and then I started telling my teacher friends about it, and they all kind of were interested, but thought it was weird. And that book ended up making like $15,000. And looking back, it's pretty crazy that I decided to quit based on that one book. But I described my financial situation to you, and so if you kind of look at where I wasn't really in a great position for teaching anyway. I mean, if I had kept teaching, we were going to go broke anyway. So it didn't really feel like I was throwing away a secure future for the risk of publishing. It felt kind of like I had a desperate chance in writing, and then I had a doomed future in teaching. So once I had gotten rolling on the writing, it rapidly became so much work too that I just had no life. I mean, I used to do all kinds of stuff in my spare time, and part of that went away because I had kids. But the other part was that it's just I had no hobbies. I wasn't watching shows. I wasn't playing games. I wasn't doing any kind of activity. It was like get home from work, and then just get on the computer and mess with Photoshop and still try to teach myself how to make covers. I was reading books about like typography. I was trying to keep up with the market trends. I was learning a bunch in the Slack and talking to people in there and getting their help and everything. And it was just like a whirlwind of a ton of work. And I was still trying to be a teacher on top of that. So I was ready to just give it a shot. And thankfully, my wife was really supportive. And she basically said, "Oh, yeah, go ahead and quit." And so I did. And looking back again, that seems pretty crazy now, but that's just how it went. It didn't feel as crazy in the moment for some reason. But I put in my 2 weeks notice, which my principal said needed to be four for some reason. And I kept working on book two during that phase. And then once I was done, I wrote the next book. And as this, as you would imagine, the kind of the worst happened in my next book made 5,000 instead of 15. And then the book after that only made like 1,200. And so I had gone from October, I'm really bad with months. It was like November. Yeah, it was like December. And I was on a downward path, just like in sci-fi where my first book did pretty well. And then it started getting worse and worse. And at that point I was really wondering if I'd made a big mistake. Like we had sold our house to get our down payment back and to have a little money to kind of float on. And we got a cheaper condo to live in. And my books weren't really looking like they were going to pay the bills. And then it was either my fourth or fifth book on my current pen name that finally hit the top 100 and made a bunch of money. And then it was kind of crazy from there. And that's sort of where I got into what I was talking about in the first video with all the goal stuff. Like you go from hoping that you're going to hit top 500 again to one book goes rank 40. And then suddenly it's like, okay, well, if the next one goes 60, am I satisfied with that? And then, kind of things got crazy from there. And so that's pretty much how it started was I got a bunch of help from my brother and then the people in that Slack. And I got pretty obsessed with all things self-publishing for a while. And then I had a bunch of ups and downs. And I still have a bunch of ups and downs as far as the book performance goes. And that's just kind of what I have learned as part of the package, I guess, for the majority of people, even people who end up doing really well. It's just really hard to hit it out of the park every time. And so if you're somebody who's lucky enough to have books that do really well, I feel like there's only a handful of people who consistently just kill it every single time. And I'm not one of those people, but I am lucky enough that now it feels like I have enough of a platform that when I put out a new book, it's got a good leg up on the competition just because I have like name recognition and brand recognition and that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to decide if there's, because I can't really go too much more into where things went from there without sort of giving away my pen name. And I still haven't decided. I don't know if I feel too terrified about the idea of sharing my pen name. There's the obvious downside where, if I'm doing okay right now, why would I change anything in terms of, putting my pen name out there and revealing that X pen name is actually a guy and then opening myself up to somebody who, unknown to me wants me to suffer and then tries to use that to make people irritated with me. And I don't really think all of that stuff has as much of an impact as people give it credit for in the author world. I think that's kind of a smaller chunk of people than most authors feel like it is when there's some kind of like scandal or hashtag gate thing going on. But I'm probably going to just keep, for now, a little cautious with that. And then maybe, I don't know, at some point, I guess I'll open myself up to being willing to share or maybe willing to be less careful about giving away stuff that if somebody cared enough, they could kind of connect the dots and figure out who I am. Because I know from Reddit, a bunch of people have already kind of figured out who I am, so it's not the best kept secret already. So I'll wrap this video up here, and then I think I'm going to record another video right after this that's more less about me and more about just another topic. And then I did think it would be fun. I don't know if I'll do this today or if I'll have time because there's something I actually need to work on. instead of distracting myself all day. And I see it's already 12-ish, so I have like 3 hours and I haven't done much today. So I'll probably do one more video. And the thing I was thinking about doing that would be fun was I kind of wanted to do like almost a walkthrough. Like I'll share my screen, and then because I've been kind of tempted to start a new pen name in a new genre, and it might be kind of fun for me to just walk through what my thoughts are as I'm doing that, and maybe even write the beginning of a book, and then kind of just share my screen while I do it and kind of talk through what I'm thinking about as I'm doing that. And I probably, as far as sharing my screen while I'm writing, I've never tried that before, so I don't know if I will be able to write the same while I know that I'm kind of recording myself. Especially, I don't know how it'll change if I stop to talk while I'm doing it, but I'll probably try that. I mean, if it's a horrible disaster, I'll just never share the video and no harm will be done. But that's something I'm thinking about, and maybe want to try. I might even try that today if I get my other important stuff done first. So anyway, I'll cut this video off and then I'll probably jump into the next one and upload that separately. So thanks for watching.